My name is Emily Carter, and when I tell you my life changed the day we read my father's will, I mean it in every way. I was 29 years old at the time, working as a schoolteacher in our quiet Midwestern town. My days were filled with the chatter of children, chalk dust on my fingers, and the endless cycle of grading papers late into the night. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and I like to think my father was proud of me for it. But nothing could prepare me for losing him. My father, Richard Carter, wasn't just my parent. He was my anchor, my role model, my safe place. He had built our family's small hardware store with his own hands. I spent much of my childhood at that store, running up and down the aisles, helping him organize nails or paint cans, watching him smile at every customer as though they were old friends. He used to tell me, "Emily, this store is more than wood and shelves. It's our name, our blood. Someday it'll be yours and Mark's to keep alive." Mark, my brother. Even saying his name back then left a bitter taste in my mouth. Mark was older than me by 6 years, and for as long as I could remember, he carried himself like he was above everyone else. Where I saw family as something sacred, he saw leverage. Where I wanted fairness, he wanted control. And then there was Linda, my stepmother. My father married her years after my mother died, and though she wore the mask of elegance and grace, I always saw through her. Her pearl necklaces, her carefully chosen words, her way of pretending to care. It was all a performance. When Dad passed away, I thought grief was the worst thing I'd ever endure. I was wrong. Because the day of the will reading revealed a betrayal I never imagined. But before I take you there, let me pause. If you're listening to this right now, whether you're lying in bed with headphones driving home from work, or maybe just scrolling late at night, I want you to know something. You're not just a listener, you're part of this community. We share stories of justice, revenge, and redemption together, and I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop it in the comments, because every time you do, I feel like we're building something bigger than just stories. We're building a family. All right, back to my story. The lawyer's office smelled like polished wood and old books. The kind of smell that makes you feel small, like the walls have seen generations of secrets. I sat there, my hands clasped in my lap so tightly my knuckles ached. Linda was across from me, perfect as always, not a hair out of place. Beside her, Mark lounged with his phone in hand, like this was all just a boring errand he couldn't wait to get through. Mr. Harris, our family's lawyer, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Richard Carter." My heart pounded. At first, things seemed fair. Dad left me his old watch, something I cherished because I remembered it ticking on his wrist when he taught me how to ride a bike. Mark got Dad's old set of tools, which seemed fitting enough. But then came the words that made my world tilt. "The Carter hardware store shall be passed in its entirety to Mark Carter." My breath caught. My ears rang. I wanted to stand up, shout, scream that this was wrong. Dad had promised me, more than once, that the store was for both of us, that we'd share it, run it together. And then, as if that wasn't enough, Mr. Harris continued, "The family home shall remain in the possession of Linda Carter." I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. Everything my father built was slipping away. Mark leaned back, smirking. "Guess Dad knew who could handle responsibility." "You're a teacher, Emily. The business takes real brains." I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. "Mr. Harris, are you certain?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Are you absolutely sure this is what my father wanted?" The lawyer looked uneasy, his eyes flicking between me and the paper. "These are the documents I was given, signed and dated." But in my gut, I knew. Something was off. Linda gave me a thin smile, adjusting her necklace, and in her eyes, I saw it. The satisfaction, the smugness, the quiet message. This was my doing. Something snapped inside me in that moment. A tiny spark lit in my chest, one that told me I couldn't just accept this. No, I would find the truth. And when I did, I'd make sure they regretted ever crossing me. I left the office in silence. The sun outside was blinding, but all I felt was cold. "Emily!" Tom's voice cut through the noise in my head. He jogged up beside me. Tom Willis, my childhood friend, the one person I trusted. He had come with me for support, though I hadn't realized how much I'd need him until now. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. This doesn't make sense, Tom. Dad promised me. He would never leave me with nothing. Tom put his hand on my shoulder, steady and warm. Then maybe you need to find out what really happened. His words stuck to me like glue. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into my father's study, the room where he spent hours reading, working, dreaming. It smelled faintly of his aftershave, like he had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any second. I sat at his desk, running my hand over the worn wood, feeling the grooves where his pen had pressed deep into the grain over the years. I pulled open drawers, searching for something, anything that would explain why the will had been changed. Then I noticed it, a small drawer on the side, locked. I tugged, but it didn't budge. Desperate, I pulled open other drawers, rifling through papers until I felt something taped to the bottom. A brass key. With trembling hands, I slid the key into the lock. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside was a bundle of letters tied together with string. The paper was yellowed, fragile. My heart hammered as I untied the knot and pulled out the top one. It was addressed to me. My hands shook as I unfolded it. "Dearest Emily," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am no longer here. There are things I need you to know." I gasped, my vision blurring with tears. My father had written to me. To me, not Mark, not Linda. To me. And with every word, I realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I held the letter in trembling hands, my heart racing faster than my thoughts. The paper smelled faintly of my father's study, dust, ink, and the faintest trace of cedar wood polish. I pressed it to my chest for a moment before forcing myself to keep reading. "My sweet Emily," it said, "I know I've told you many times that everything I have built is for you and your brother to share. But I fear things are not as simple as they should be. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I must trust you with the truth." My breath caught. I wiped my eyes and leaned closer to the desk lamp, devouring every word. Linda, she has her own ways. I suspect she may try to twist things when I am no longer here. I have tried to put protections in place, but I worry it may not be enough. Remember, Emily, you know me. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, then it probably is. The letter ended abruptly, as though he had intended to write more but never got the chance. My hand shook as I folded it back up. My father hadn't trusted Linda. He had tried to warn me. My gut was right. Something had been tampered with. Leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, tears slipping down my cheeks. This wasn't just about losing the store or the house. This was about betrayal. My father's last wishes had been twisted, stolen, and I wasn't going to let it go. The next morning, I barely touched my breakfast. My mind was consumed with questions. How had Linda and Mark done it? Had they convinced Mr. Harris to look the other way? Had they forged signatures? Bribed someone? Tom stopped by, like he always did when he worried about me. "You didn't sleep, did you?" he asked, handing me a cup of coffee. I shook my head. "Tom, I found a letter from Dad. He warned me about Linda. He said something might happen. To the will." Tom's eyes widened. "Emily, that's huge. You can use that." I shook my head. "It's not enough. It doesn't prove anything. It's just his suspicion. I need more." He sat across from me, his expression serious. "Then you dig. You find out what they did." I nodded, determination solidifying in my chest. That afternoon, I drove back to the hardware store. I hadn't been there since the funeral. It hurt too much. But as I pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot, I realized it wasn't just grief keeping me away. It was fear. Fear that I'd never belong here again. Inside, the store smelled the same. Wood, paint, a faint hint of motor oil. My father's presence was everywhere. But instead of him, I found Mark, standing behind the counter like he already owned the place. "Well, look who decided to visit," he said with a smirk. "Thought you'd be too busy crying to come by." I ignored his jab and walked slowly down the aisles, my fingers brushing the shelves. Every nail, every hammer, every box of screws was a memory of my childhood. Mark followed me. "You should just accept it, Emily. Dad knew I could handle this. You're a teacher. Stick to your books and kids." I spun around, anger flashing in my chest. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. You don't know the first thing about responsibility. You only care about yourself." He chuckled. "Says the little girl who can't let go of daddy's promises." I wanted to slap him, but instead I forced myself to walk out, keeping my anger bottled inside, because I knew that soon enough I'd make him regret every word. That night, I returned to my father's study. I searched every drawer, every folder, every scrap of paper. Finally, in the back of a filing cabinet, I found a folder marked Estate. Inside were drafts of his will. Some named both me and Mark as equal. Heirs to the store, my chest tightened. So he had planned to leave it to both of us. But why had the final version changed? I flipped through page after page until I noticed something strange. The signatures on the older drafts, my father's handwriting, looked slightly different from the final version I had seen in Mr. Harris's office. My pulse quickened. Was it possible? Could the final will have been forged? I needed proof. The following days blurred into a cycle of teaching at school by day and investigating at night. I searched through my father's checkbooks, bank statements, and letters. And every time Linda or Mark tried to act smug around me, it only fueled the fire burning in my chest. Then came the night I overheard them. I had gone back to the house late to gather some of Dad's things. Linda and Mark were in the kitchen, their voices low but sharp. I froze just outside the doorway. "You need to be careful," Linda hissed. "If Emily keeps snooping, she'll figure it out." "She's not that smart," Mark scoffed. "Besides, Mr. Harris won't say anything. He owes you too much." My blood ran cold. They had done something. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. I stayed there, my heart pounding in my ears until their voices faded. Then I slipped out quietly, my mind racing. It was true. I wasn't imagining it. They had stolen everything from me. That night, lying awake in my bed, I thought about my father's letter. Trust your instincts. Well, my instincts told me it was time to fight back, but I also knew this wasn't going to be easy. Linda and Mark weren't stupid. They were careful, calculated. If I made one wrong move, they'd crush me. So I decided to play their game, quietly, patiently, because revenge, real revenge, is best served slowly. I started with Mr. Harris. The next day, I requested a private meeting with him. He looked nervous when I arrived, his hands fiddling with the edge of his desk. "Emily," he said, forcing a smile. "How can I help you?" "I just want to understand," I said softly. "Why my father changed everything. Why he'd leave me out." He cleared his throat. "Your father. He wanted what was best." I leaned forward, my eyes locking on his. "I found drafts, Mr. Harris. Drafts where the store was to be split between Mark and me. And I found a letter. My father was worried about Linda. He thought she might try something." His face drained of color. I knew then. "He was hiding something, please," I whispered. "I loved my father. I just want the truth." For a moment, I thought he might confess, but instead, he looked away. "I can't discuss this further, Emily. I'm sorry." I walked out of his office with my heart pounding. He knew. He absolutely knew, and if he wouldn't tell me willingly, I'd have to find another way. Driving home, I replayed everything in my head. My father's warning, the suspicious signature, the conversation I overheard, Mr. Harris's guilty expression. Piece by piece, it was all coming together, but it wasn't enough yet. I needed undeniable proof, something that would expose Linda and Mark for what they had done. Something that would humiliate them the way they humiliated me. As I pulled into my driveway, I whispered to myself, "Don't worry, Dad. I'll make this right. I promise." Because I wasn't just Emily Carter, the quiet teacher anymore. Was Richard Carter's daughter, and they were about to learn what happens when you steal from me. I woke before dawn, coffee bitter on my tongue and resolve bright in my chest. I laid my father's drafts across the kitchen table like a deck of cards only he and I knew how to read. In the older versions, his signature flowed like a river. He'd traveled 1,000 times. On the filed copy, the pen hesitated as if it didn't know the bends. I didn't trust my outrage. I trusted the paper. By 7, I was buckling the folder into the passenger seat and driving to the courthouse for a certified copy of what Mr. Harris had filed. The clerk stamped it with the mechanical finality of government, and I carried it outside like something breakable. Tom met me on the steps with a grease-stained bag from the only bakery that opens before the sun. "Eat," he said, pressing it into my hands. "I will," I lied. "I need a handwriting expert." He blinked at me and then grinned. There she is, the field commander. By 8:30, I had a short list. By 9, I was in a second-floor office over a dentist and a travel agency that still advertised cruises with clip art. Dr. Patricia Ames wore neat cotton gloves and an expression that didn't flatter anybody, least of all wishful thinking. Under her lamp, the filed signature looked like a dancer counting steps. "Natural writing has rhythm," she murmured, tracing air above the ink. "Forgery has choreography." My mouth went dry. "Which is this?" "I won't be definitive. Without the original," she said, "but this is outside your father's known range. Potentially simulated. Get me the original. Keep chain of custody clean." I left with a to-do list that felt like a map through fog. On instinct, I texted Tom and then slid into a booth at the diner to call every number on the notary block of the will. That was when my phone lit with a name I hadn't expected. Jenna, the assistant in Mr. Harris's office who ran things with a quiet competence everyone pretended was invisible. "You don't have long," she whispered. "Check the notaries. Commission record. And the building's security logs. We only keep the footage 30 days unless there's a legal hold." "Jenna, why are you helping me?" "Because your father helped me once when nobody else did," she said, and hung up before gratitude could make us both foolish. The commission database said the notary, Amy Delgado, had filed a temporary out-of-state address 2 weeks before the alleged signature. An insurance office confirmed she'd been in Florida with her mother for 6 weeks. "If she notarized something in your town last month," the receptionist said dryly, "she did it by teleportation." Tom and I went straight to the building's property manager. Vivian peered at us over burgundy glasses, typed, and frowned. "No legal hold on that day," she said. "And there's a maintenance ticket the following week. Camera outage on the 12th floor from 1:10 to 3:05 p.m. Mr. Harris's office was on 12. The will was time-stamped 2:02. I drove to the hospital next. The release of information clerk was efficient and kind in the way of people who see grief mostly in forms. By morning, they called. At 1:55 p.m., on the day my father allegedly signed his will downtown, he was receiving an antibiotic infusion. At 2:10 p.m., a nurse recorded his vitals. He never left the unit. I cried for 60 seconds in my car for that. Ordinary hour, the beeping, the fluorescent hum, the way a body is measured when a life is slipping. Then I called Dr. Ames for an appointment as soon as probate would release the original and wrote chain of custody on a sticky note like a spell I believed in. In the public library that afternoon, I learned the legal names for the things Linda and Mark had done: undue influence, improper execution, fraud. I made a list of what I had and what I needed. At the bottom, I wrote Harris and drew a box around it until the paper softened. He looked smaller behind his desk than I remembered. "Emily," he said, offering a smile that broke like thin ice. "I have drafts with equal ownership," I said. A notary who wasn't in the state. A building outage that covered the exact hour of the signature. Hospital records placing my father in bed. And a letter where he warned me Linda would try to twist things. He picked up a glass of water, with a hand that wasn't steady. "I didn't draft that final will," he said at last. "Linda brought it to me, already signed with a stamped notary block. She said your father insisted on finalizing quickly." "You filed it," I said. He shut his eyes. "I failed your father." He looked at a framed photo on his shelf as if the people in it could absolve him. "If I give you my file notes, and emails with Linda, and a sworn declaration, will you fix this?" "Don't warn them," I said. "If you do, I'll know." "How?" "Because their panic will leave fingerprints." When I stepped into the hall, the carpet was the same cheap taupe, but the building felt like it had shifted its weight, as if it had chosen a side. Tom was on my porch when I got home with takeout and a grin that made the world less heavy. How'd it go? He cracked, I said. Enough to count. That night, I printed the will contest petition, attaching what I could and listing what was coming: an expert report, a notary's testimony, the lawyer's declaration, security logs, hospital records, my father's drafts, my father's letter. I slept with the folder on the nightstand like armor. In the morning, a padded envelope arrived with no return address, a photocopy of a notary journal page, a diagonal void slashed across the entry. A sticky note in neat block letters said, "Ask Amy why she marked this void." I drove to the insurance office where she sometimes worked and waited in my car like a stakeout until a woman with a canvas tote and "don't waste my time" eyes walked in. We spoke in the break room, a humming fridge and a pot of coffee between us. "Someone used my stamp," she said, tapping the voided entry. "I was in Florida that day. I reported it. Nobody wanted the headache. If you need me to testify, I will." She slid a flash drive to me. "My report to the state. And emails with Mr. Harris's office asking to verify a notarization I didn't perform. Jenna again. Quiet courage traveling under the door like light." I filed the will contest that afternoon. The clerk's stamp hit the paper with a ring that vibrated in my ribs. On the courthouse steps, my phone buzzed with Linda's voice lacquered in sugar. "Darling, I heard you're making quite a spectacle." "Good," I said. "I want them to look." "You don't know what you're starting." "I do," I said, and hung up before fear could find a foothold. On my porch, a plain envelope waited with a safe deposit box key taped inside and a number I recognized from a day when I was 6, and my father whispered, "See this box, kiddo? It's where we keep what matters." The bank vault was cool and clean, the metal drawer heavy in my hands. Inside, a notarized statement, months old, naming me as co-owner upon his death, and a handwritten memorandum spelling out in my father's blunt script his intentions for equal shares and equal say. Beside it, a USB labeled "Store Books," backups. Dates ran like vertebrae through the last 3 years, including the months Mark had come back to help. When I pulled into my driveway, Mark was waiting, leaning on his car like he'd practiced, in a mirror. "What's that?" he said, eyeing the folder. "Evidence," I said, and his smile thinned into something meaner. He grabbed my arm. I looked down until he let go. "You were always soft," he sneered. "Soft things shape the world," I said. "Water. Time. The truth." I shut the door before whatever he threw next could stain my house. I plugged my father's USB into my laptop and watched the store's ledgers blossom across my screen. The numbers were clean until suddenly they weren't. Small equipment withdrawals that never matched invoices, checks to a vendor that turned out to be a UPS box, amounts small enough to hide in a busy week and big enough to matter when you stacked them. The signature on those checks belonged to Mark. Motive shone out of the spreadsheet with the clarity of a bell. By morning, Mr. Harris had sent a message. "I'm ready to talk." He and Jenna met us in a conference room with a long table and a bowl of mints nobody ever ate. He set down a folder thicker than mine and a small envelope. "I've notified my carrier," he said, the words tasting like penance. "Here are my file notes and a signed declaration about the circumstances. These are emails where Linda asked me to expedite probate, and an invoice, paid by a cashier's check from an account in her maiden name, for a private IT contractor to fix a hallway camera glitch." I didn't thank him, not yet. This wasn't absolution, but I slid the papers into my folder like new bones. "They'll try to settle," he said, "or scare you. They'll call me a liar." "I have something they don't," I said. He looked, genuinely curious. "What's that?" "The patience to let the truth do its work." On our way out, my phone rang from a blocked number. A man's voice. "Ms. Carter, you don't know me. Daniel Crow. I handle accounts for a few small businesses in town. Mark owes people he doesn't want you to meet. If you're going to pull this thread, you should know what's on the other end. 8 o'clock. The milkshake place your father liked." The line clicked off. I told Tom. He nodded once like he'd been expecting the plot to widen. At 7:55, the neon sign buzzed over the diner window, the way it had since I was a kid counting sprinkles. Daniel was already there, a compact man in his 40s, with a bookkeeper's quiet and a fighter's eyes. He didn't shake my hand. He slid a folder across the table. Copies, he said. Never originals. Inside were invoices that matched nothing in the store's legitimate books, a list of cash advances Mark had taken from a man named Alvarez, with interest rates that sounded like threats, and a payment ledger written in someone else's careful hand. He started small, Daniel said, got comfortable, then he got behind. Alvarez doesn't send reminders, he sends messages. If Mark didn't get the store outright, he'd have to open the books and this would come crawling out. So he made sure he'd be the only one looking. Why tell me? I asked. Because your father paid me fairly when times were thin, he said. Because he told me the store was a town, not a till. And because men like Alvarez don't care who bleeds as long as the debt pays them. I closed the folder. If this goes public, Alvarez won't like it. He won't like the judge either, Daniel said. Pick your battlefield. When I stepped out into the night, the air had the thin bite of a season turning. Tom walked, me to my car, scanning the lot like habit. So the thread leads to a man with a ledger and a taste for fear, he said. Great. It leads to motive that fits my father's backups like a key, I said. Now we show the town the lock. We spent the next morning mapping a reveal that wouldn't look like a stunt. I didn't want fireworks. I wanted a wheel turning, one click at a time until the whole machine faced the truth. We drafted a letter to the court asking for an emergency hearing to preserve evidence, security logs, the original will, the notary records. We planned notices to the store's vendors and staff. Routine audit pending, please preserve all communications. We set a date for a community meeting in the back room of the store under the pretense of thanking customers for their support after my father's death. We would talk about the store's future, and I would say the words equal shares out loud in the place that had given my life its shape. That afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number with a photo attached. My living room window, taken from the street, the curtain slightly open like an eyelid. No words, just the picture. My skin went cold even as my anger stayed hot. I called Tom. He arrived in 6 minutes. They want you rattled, he said. I'm galvanized, I said, and meant it. At the emergency hearing, the judge listened, with the patience of someone who'd heard everything and still believed in evidence. Dr. Ames testified carefully that the filed signature was outside my father's range and contained anomalies consistent with simulation. The hospital's log custodian confirmed my father's whereabouts. Amy Delgado, spine straight, told the court she had not notarized the will and had reported the misuse of her stamp. Mr. Harris, palms damp, voice steady, read his declaration. Linda sat 2 rows back in a tasteful navy dress, mouth a straight line that tried and failed to look like composure. Mark wasn't there. I didn't miss him. The judge ordered the original will and the building's security logs into immediate court custody and granted my request for a temporary restraining order preventing the disposal of store records. I don't adjudicate reputations, she said as her pen scratched, but I can protect documents. Come back with more. I walked out with Tom into a noon that felt cleaner. On the sidewalk, a woman I didn't know touched my arm and said, quietly, "Your father sold me a toolbox when I was 19 and moving out. He told me I'd fix more than screws with it. Keep going." I nodded once so I wouldn't cry, and kept going. By dusk, the town felt like a room where someone had turned down the music to hear what the quiet might say. I set chairs in the back room of the store with Tom, the wood scraping the linoleum in a rhythm that steadied me. I arranged my father's ledger printouts on a corkboard beside a photograph of him behind the counter, sleeves rolled, grin easy. People began to trickle in, old customers, neighbors, the mailmen who had known our names since before we could spell them. Some came because they loved my father. Some came because scandal is a magnet. It didn't matter. They were here. I took a breath that drew the room into my lungs. "Thank you for coming," I said, and my voice came back to me strong. "This store is my father's life's work. He meant it to be our town's too. I was told he left it to Mark alone. That isn't true. I'm here to show you what is." I didn't mention Linda or Mark by name. I didn't need to. I talked about intention and paper and the way ink can be made to lie if you let it. I held up the notarized co-ownership statement from the bank's box, read the lines in my father's handwriting describing equal say. I showed the room the patterns in the books, the withdrawals that didn't match invoices, and explained plainly what that meant for the future if we were careless. I watched people's faces as understanding moved through them like weather. There was a sound when a group of people learn something together. It isn't loud, but it changes the room. Halfway through, the bell over the front door jingled loud, enough to make people turn. Linda stood there, pearls at her throat like a hand. "This is inappropriate," she said, stepping forward. "You're slandering your family in public." "I'm honoring my father," I said. "And the truth." She looked around the room and smiled the way a knife smiles when it's just been sharpened. "You're emotional. You're not a businesswoman. You're making a mess that will cost everyone." Tom took a step forward. I put my hand on his arm without looking. "Maybe," I said, "but I'd rather make a clean mess than live in a pretty lie." Someone chuckled softly. Someone else said, "That's right." Linda's smile tightened. "This meeting is over," she said, like the room belonged to her. "No," I said, and I felt the store itself stand up beside me. "It's just getting started." She turned and left with the bell jangling behind her like punctuation. I finished what I had to say and then let people ask questions until the answers ran out and the coffee did too. After the last person left, I stood in the quiet and pressed my palm to the counter where my father had drummed his fingers when the register jammed. Tom turned off the lights one by one until only the front windows glowed with streetlight. "You did it," he said. "I started it," I said. When we stepped onto the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from a number I didn't know. I put it on speaker. A voice like gravel in a glass said, "Ms. Carter, you don't know me. But your brother does. You're interfering with money that belongs to people who don't take interference kindly. Have your little meetings, file your little papers. But understand, debts find a way to get paid." Tom's jaw flexed. "Alvarez? Or one of his?" I said. I saved the message and forwarded it to myself twice. "Now we know what we're standing in front of." We got into Tom's truck without speaking. As he pulled away, I looked back, through the store's dark windows, and saw my reflection for a second. Small, steady, a line drawn in a familiar place. The night smelled like cut grass and hot brakes. Somewhere a dog barked exactly 3 times, the way dogs do when they've made their point. I went home and put every document back in order, each edge flush, each clip tight, because chaos was their element, not mine. I left the curtains open a sliver and set my phone to record toward the window. I wasn't inviting fear in. I was letting proof find me if it tried. Before bed, I took out my father's old watch and held it to my ear. The tick was steady, stubborn. I remembered him saying once, "The thing about stubborn is it's just patience wearing work boots." I set the watch on the nightstand beside the folder and turned off the light. In the dark, my vow didn't feel like heat anymore. It felt like gravity. It felt like a wheel halfway through its turn, teeth meshing, momentum gathering, the slow, beautiful inevitability of a thing built right. Tomorrow I would take Dr. Ames the original will under a chain of custody I could swear to in court. Tomorrow I would ask the judge to subpoena Alvarez's ledger. Tomorrow I would look Mark in the eyes and tell him I knew exactly how deep the hole was and how small he looked at the bottom of it. For now I lay there and listened to the house, breathe and the watch tick and the quiet hold, and I knew with the certainty of someone who has finally stepped into her own life that we were past the point where they could frighten me back. We were in the part of the story where the truth begins to work on you whether you want it to or not, and I slept, because tomorrow was the next turn of the wheel. I woke before my alarm, the house holding its breath with me. Coffee hissed into the carafe while the sun thought about coming up, and I laid out the plan I'd recited to myself in the dark. Pick up the sealed original from the clerk under a strict chain of custody, drive straight to Dr. Ames, do not stop, do not speak to anyone who can spook you or stall you. I dressed like truth. Plain, practical, no place to hide anything. And put my father's watch on my wrist. Tick, tick, work boots. At the courthouse window, the clerk checked my ID and slid a heavy document pouch beneath the glass. I initialed, across bright stickers that shouted, "Do not tamper." The pouch had the gravity of a newborn. I signed the chain of custody log, dated every line in block letters, and walked out holding the pouch to my chest like a shield. Dr. Ames had reserved her lab room for me. She watched me photograph the pouch front and back, watched me break the seal with slow hands, watched me lift the will free as if it could shatter. She didn't touch anything until she'd changed gloves and set fresh paper on the table. Under the magnifier, she made soft sounds in her throat I couldn't read. Then angled the lamp until ink strobed softly. "See here," she said at last, and I leaned in. Line tremor inconsistent with age. Pen lifts where your father's exemplars show continuous strokes. Hesitation at the beginning and end. This is a simulated signature. My knees went loose and then found themselves again. "Definitive?" "Yes," she said, very gently, because she knew what. I'd paid to hear it. "I'll write a full report with images, measurements, and a likelihood scale. But I'm comfortable stating this signature is not authentic. Whoever penned it was imitating a model they had in front of them." I breathed. Then I texted Tom one word: confirmed. We built the next hour like scaffolding. I walked the pouch back into its envelope, sealed it with fresh tape, signed over the seams, and took photos of everything. Dr. Ames printed a preliminary letter on her letterhead, embossed and signed, stating her opinion for the emergency hearing, and promising a full forensic report within days. "Carry it like glass," she said. "People get clumsy when the truth is close." Outside, the day had brightened into itself. I wanted to run through town with the paper aloft and shout, "Do you see?" But this revenge wasn't a sprint. It was a wheel, click, click, each tooth finding its place. The courthouse hall smelled like floor polish and paper. The emergency hearing had been granted for noon. Tom found me on a bench, handed me water, and didn't say a thing until I nodded. Mr. Harris arrived with a folder and a face that looked like he'd finally stopped bargaining with himself. Linda swept in 10 minutes late, navy dress sharp, pearls unblinking. Mark wasn't there. He'd learned by now that his silence made less noise than his presence. In the small courtroom, the judge peered at us over reading glasses. "We're not trying the whole case today," she said. "We're deciding whether the contested will can stand while this moves forward, and whether to preserve certain evidence." My palms were dry. My voice worked. "Your Honor, we have a forensic examiner's preliminary opinion that the signature on the filed will is simulated. Hospital location logs showing my father was in bed at the time of signing, security records, noting a camera outage on the 12th floor during that hour, a notary whose stamp was used without her presence, and a sworn declaration from filing counsel about how the document arrived in his hands already signed. We ask the court to suspend the contested will, take custody of the original, and recognize my father's notarized co-ownership statement, pending final adjudication." Dr. Ames testified with a teacher's patience. Amy Delgado testified with a spine of iron and a voice that didn't wobble. The hospital custodian read times off a screen. Mr. Harris spoke like a man asking to be let back into his own name. Linda's attorney objected where it made sense to object and raised his chin where dignity could be performed, but the judge kept her pen moving. "I will not make a final ruling on the will today," she said at last. "But the evidence before me would make any judge skeptical of the document's integrity. I'm ordering the will into court custody, the building's original security logs into court custody, and recognizing the co-ownership statement as the operative instrument for the store's governance until this is resolved. Additionally, I'm signing a preservation order for all financial records of Carter Hardware and any affiliated vendor ledgers." Linda's jaw flickered. Tom's hand found my shoulder for a second. A brief anchor. The judge straightened the papers. "This is a small town. You'll be tempted to try this in the court of public opinion. Don't. Bring me admissible facts. We'll make law with those." Outside in the hall, the lights seemed whiter. People shuffled past us toward their own small reckonings. Linda approached with her attorney at her elbow, the pearls at her throat, shining too hard. "This isn't over," she said. "It's exactly over as much as you made it," I said. "And exactly beginning as much as I am willing to finish it." Her smile thinned. "Settle," she said. "Sell me your interest. Take the house, move on." "No," I said, and felt the word fit my mouth like it had been made there. That night, the voicemail came again. A different number. The same gravel laid over ice. Debts get paid. Tom forwarded the message to a detective he trusted and installed a camera at my front door that texted me every time a moth tried to philosophize with the porch light. I wasn't scared, not exactly. Fear had a direction, and this was something else. Alertness braided with resolve. I slept with my father's watch ticking on the nightstand and my folder on the chair, and when morning came, I was ready. We ran our plan like a drill. Request subpoenas for Alvarez's ledgers, notice Mark's bank for records on the vendor, account, contact vendors and staff with a formal preserve notice, schedule a community meeting for the weekend. Tom drafted an email blast to customers announcing an appreciation night. I wrote a line that said, "We'll be sharing Richard Carter's vision for the store's future." And when I reread it, my chest hurt in a way that felt like a bruise. Resolving. At lunch, Daniel Crow called to say he'd found the thing we needed and wished we didn't. We met in his tiny office stacked with file boxes and busted calculators. He slid 3 copies across the desk. A ledger sheet with Mark's initials beside cash advances, a payment schedule from Alvarez's man written in neat block letters, and an IOU in Mark's hand with our store's name scrawled as collateral. He was late, Daniel said. They were going to collect at the end of the month. If he didn't own the store outright by then, he'd lose access and the IOU would be worthless to them. Hence the rush. I thought about the camera outage, the notary stamp, the way Linda had stepped in like someone picking a lock that wasn't hers. Linda knew? She knew enough to know cash was bleeding, he said. Whether she knew about Alvarez is above my pay grade. But if you put this in front of a judge, she'll see why someone might forge a document and fix a camera. He gave me copies and kept the originals for now. You'll ask for a formal subpoena, he said. You'll do it right. I am, I said. I will. The appreciation night came quicker than sleep. We set up folding chairs in the back room and laid out coffee in paper cups because my father believed anything could be made easier by caffeine and kindness. I put his photograph above the register and whispered, "Watch this, Dad," which is to say, I wanted him there to see me carry his name correctly. People came in 2 at a time and 3 at a time. Some brought casseroles because that's what you do when the living need feeding. I stood up. My voice didn't shake. Thank you for coming. This store is my father's handshake to this town. He believed in fair dealing and open books. I want you to know what I know, and I want you to hear from me what comes next. I didn't mention Linda or Mark by name. This wasn't a spectacle. I talked about signatures that stutter and ink that tries to lie. I explained the court's order and what it meant. The will in custody, the co-ownership statement recognized, records preserved. I told them we'd be implementing transparency measures my father would have liked, monthly summaries on the bulletin, board, open office hours with me. People nodded. A few people cried. After, a boy texted under his mother's elbow and then looked up to ask shyly, "Will there still be candy by the register?" I laughed with my throat tight and said, "There. Will always be candy by the register." Linda came halfway through and stood in the doorway like a storm choosing whether to drop rain. When I finished, she said loudly, "This is defamation," and left before anyone could answer defamation with a dictionary. A few neighbors followed her with their eyes and then turned back to me. You could feel the ground choosing, grain by grain. The next morning, the detective called to say the voicemail met the threshold for harassment and he'd logged a report. "These men talk loud until paper talks louder," he said. "Keep everything." I texted him Daniel's copies and asked him to hold a subpoena open for the originals. He said he would. At noon, a process server in a windbreaker knocked on my door to hand me a thick envelope. Inside, a petition from Linda seeking an injunction to stop me from damaging the business's reputation, and a demand that the court prohibit me from interfering with the heir's quiet enjoyment. I laughed out loud, alone in my hallway, the sound startled out of me like a bird. In our response, we attached Dr. Ames's preliminary report, the hospital logs, Amy Delgado's statement, Mr. Harris's declaration, and copies of Daniel's ledger findings with an affidavit that he held the originals. My attorney, a woman named Crosby, who wore her hair like a point, filed a motion for sanctions that read like a slow burn. "If opposing counsel is going to call smoke a rumor," she said to me, We'll bring the fire marshal. The hearing on Linda's injunction was packed. The judge read the filings, looked up, and said, Ms. Carter has not damaged the business's reputation by informing stakeholders of court orders and governance updates. The reputation is damaged, if at all, by the facts alleged about the will's authenticity and certain financial irregularities. Motion denied. And counsel, choose your adjectives more carefully. In the corridor afterward, Mr. Harris approached me without his lawyer, a thing that looked like contrition. The disciplinary board called, he said. They'll suspend. Me pending their review. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it, because I believed in consequences, but also in people not being their worst day forever. I'm not, he said, surprising me. It's what happens when you stop being careful with your name. He glanced at the courtroom door. I'm testifying fully at the main hearing. Good, I said. That's the right thing. 2 days later, Dr. Ames's full report landed in my email like a gavel. 26 pages of line quality, stroke analysis, comparative charts, every argument tethered to a figure. The conclusion was clear as clean glass. We filed it immediately. The judge set the trial date. On the morning of trial, I wore the same watch and the same steadiness as before. Tom drove us and didn't make jokes because the day didn't call. For them. The courtroom smelled like old wood and air conditioning. The pews creaked with neighbors and curiosity. In the front row, Linda sat with a posture so straight it might break. Mark came in last with his tie crooked and his eyes restless, a man measuring every exit. Crosby stood and told the story the documents had told us. A father's true intent, a forged signature, a camera conveniently blind, a notary's stamp, used without its owner, a son siphoning cash, a debt collector impatient with the pace of math. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke like a bell. Dr. Ames took the stand first, a professor on the best day of a class. She explained forgery without theater, showed the lines that didn't belong, named the hesitation where my father's hand never hesitated. Amy followed, firm and clear. The hospital custodian read times like a metronome. Mr. Harris went last in our parade, and when he finished, the courtroom had that feeling places get when everyone knows what the floor is made of. Linda's attorney called no witnesses. He cross-examined like a man trying to talk a river into flowing uphill. When he sat down, the judge shuffled her papers and removed her glasses, the way people do when they're about to say something that matters. The court finds the filed. Will invalid, she said, and the room's air changed shape. The signature does not withstand scrutiny, and the circumstances of its presentation are inconsistent with proper execution. The court recognizes the co-ownership statement of Richard Carter as the operative expression of his intent regarding the store. We will refer the matter of the forged will to the district attorney. As to the house, ownership remains with Ms. Carter's stepmother as marital property. Occupancy arrangements are a civil matter for separate negotiation. She looked at me over the edge of the bench. Ms. Carter, this is not total victory, but it is a true one. I nodded. It felt exactly that way. True, not triumphant. Out in the hall, microphones appeared like mushrooms after rain. I said as little as I could. I had no interest in being famous for surviving a lie. Linda passed with her face arranged into a mask. Compassion might recognize if it squinted. Mark tried for the side exit and found a detective waiting. Mr. Carter? The detective said. You'll need to come with us. The hallway sound shifted again, that hush that happens when a town learns something together. I didn't watch the cuffs go on. I didn't need to. Revenge for me wasn't the medal on his wrist. It was the plainness of the truth holding. Outside, the day was brilliant, the sky shamelessly blue like it had decided to overdo it on purpose. People stopped me to say my father had once fixed a lamp for them for free or delivered a toolbox to a porch when money was thin. I listened. I said thank you. I walked to the store under a sun that made the windows shine like they'd been waiting for light. We kept the sign Carter Hardware. I added a smaller one beneath it, co-owned by Emily Carter. The rededication wasn't fancy. We cut a ribbon I'd bought at the craft store and put out coffee, and I said a few words that felt like both a beginning and a vow. Equal shares, equal say. Open books. The watch ticked steady on my wrist. Tom stood by the door, armed with a smile and a receipt roll, and Jenna came with a potted fern that looked like it had always belonged behind the counter. Daniel slipped in late and left early, the way people do who know about ledgers and prefer quiet to thanks. In the afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. The grass leaned in the wind, and the stone said my father's name in letters that will outlast me. I knelt and told him what we'd done. I didn't bring the documents. I brought the silence that comes after a long workday when the job is good. We kept your store honest, I said. We kept our name. On my way home, I stopped at the milkshake place. The neon flickered like memory. I bought a strawberry shake for me and a chocolate one to pour on the root of a tree out back, the way I had when I was a kid and thought the earth could drink what we couldn't finish. I laughed at myself and didn't take it back. That evening, I sat on my porch with Tom while the street changed color. We didn't talk about Alvarez or indictments or sentencing. Those would happen or not happen with the machinery of law grinding at its own pace. What mattered for once was the soft click inside me, the wheel completing its turn and catching. On the next, a dog barked 3 times down the block like punctuation. You did it, Tom said eventually. We did it, I said. He shrugged the credit off like he always does. What now? Now I teach school and run a store, I said. Now I put candy by the register and monthly summaries on the corkboard. Now I let the town see through us and into us. Now I sleep. He raised his paper cup. To stubborn with work boots. To stubborn with work boots, I said, and toasted the fading sky. Later, inside, I put the folder on a shelf, not on the chair by the door anymore, because I didn't need to run. I set the watch on the nightstand and listened to it tick. For a while, each click a promise that time was a thing you could keep if you tended it. When I turned off the light, I lay a long time in the ordinary dark, the kind that doesn't scare you because it belongs to your own house. The last thought, before sleep, was the softest. I am my father's daughter. Not because a judge recognized it, not because a sign says it, but because I made the store honest and let the truth work. And because in the end, the revenge I wanted was just that, a thing built right, standing true. If you've been with me to this last breath of the story, whether you're listening in your car, washing dishes, or walking under a wide sky, thank you. Justice here wasn't fire. It was patience and paper, and people brave enough to tell the truth. If you felt that click of the wheel, tell me where you listened from, join our community, and share this with someone who needs to hear that truth has a rhythm stronger than any lie. I'm Emily, and this was our turn of the wheel.